This morning is Lessons for Living out of the book of Psalm in Psalm 18. And this is something this psalm is a beautiful psalm. It is one that is, I believe, the third longest of the psalms. And it is one, too, that as you look at it, you find in the introduction, if you have an expanded translation, I guess you'd say King James will give introductions to it. And you'll find that it begins and says, the chief musician, a psalm of David, the servant of the Lord, who spake unto the Lord the words of the song in the day that the Lord delivered him from the hand of his enemies and from the hand of Saul. And he said, well, you go back and you find that this is a psalm that's basically found in almost the exact same form in 2 Samuel, the 22nd chapter. In verse 1 and 2, it begins, David spake unto the Lord the words of the song in the day the Lord had delivered him out of the hand of all his enemies and out of the hand of Saul, and he said. So this was written in 2 Samuel. You find the very next chapter, as the psalm in chapter 22 ends, chapter 23, these are the last words of David. And so this is something that was written maybe as he contemplated. You know, as you get a little older, you look back on your life, you look back at things that have happened, things that you've been able to come through, to have accomplished in your life. And so maybe he's doing this, and as he does that, he stood in amazement of God, all that God had done. And as you look through the Psalms, you find that is a constant theme with David. He does stand amazed at God. And so especially in times of trial and persecution. Now you think about that and you think about our lives. In the book of 1 Peter, the 5th chapter, verse 8, we find that the devil is a roaring lion. He goeth about seeking whom he may devour. That's you and I. Jesus talked and said that if we follow him, it's a narrow way that's going to lead to eternal life. We find Paul saying if we live godly in Christ Jesus, we'll suffer persecution. Peter talks about that we shouldn't be surprised whenever people do persecute us. All of these things are there. And so as you look at the psalmist and you realize the basis of this, you know, he's looking and saying he is so amazed at God and so thankful for what God has done, will do, can do. And that has so much application to us. So the idea of lessons for living, there are so many that can be gotten from this. Now what I want to do is look, because one of the things that we have to have in our life is a relationship with God in the sense of knowing who he is. We find that we must know him if we're to have salvation. Well, that entails the idea of having a relationship that comes through being born again, but it also is an understanding of who he is, so that we can have the confidence in life. And so, first of all, I look at it and I see the picture in Psalm 18 of his or my God. And I look and I see one of the things there is the personal aspect that David uses, that my aspect. And we've talked about that before. Anytime we look at the Scriptures, we need to be personal. God isn't a God afar off. God isn't somebody else's God. We talk about God, and we need to realize he can be, should be, my God. And so as I look at this, I try to personalize it and think of what I think of God, how I view him. And so I see he is my strength in verse 1. John was talking Bible class in the book of James about weakness, how sometimes we feel we can't go on. And that word sickness, as he speaks of in chapter 5, is oftentimes used of that, of being an infirmity that pulls us down and we just don't know how we can accomplish things and go on. Well, God is our strength. He is the source of our strength. That's Paul in Philippians, the 4th chapter. I can do all things through Christ, who strengtheneth me. So God is my strength. God is my rock, a stability. I think a rock, you think of it as a place of protection, but also a place in which you're stable. You think about, you can hold forth. The enemies come against you, not only a place of refuge, but a place of stability. And then he talks about a fortress. Here's a defensive position. He talks about a deliverer. Not going to make it through. God says, yeah, you will. You know, we can do all things. Revelation 17 and verse 14. These make war with the Lamb. And he is the one who overcomes. And they that are with him. That's you and I. And then he's God. The Almighty. I mean, you never forget that. With God, all things are possible. Why? Because he's the one who spake and it was done. He is the one who sustains all things. He is the one who is, always has been, always will be. There's none other like him. And then he is the buckler. A shield is what a word we would use today. And so you look and we have the ability to put forth that shield. The scriptures talk about themselves being that shield. He is the horn of my salvation. The horn is the strength. He is the one who provides that salvation. He is the provider of everything that we have. He is the high tower. I'm now above reach. The dangers can't get unto me. They can't attain unto me. He is worthy to be praised. Now you look at that, and that's just the first 3 verses. And there you find 9 separate things about God that the psalmist looks and he says, you know, this is the God I serve. This is my God. Well, is that how I view God? But the thing is, he's not through. You look, he goes on in verse 18, he is my stay. He prevented me or was before me in the day of my calamity, or they prevented me. But the Lord was my stay. Again, something to hold forth, something that is stable, something that will allow me, that as they come up, they think they're in control. No, God is. And then, his way is perfect. Whenever you get in times of trial and struggle, you've seen the commercial, I've seen it on the easy button. You know, what's the way out? What's the way, how am I going to go? His way is perfect. You can't improve on it. Sadly, in the world, so many people, they say, well, I know the Bible says, but. No, God's way is perfect. We cannot go any further. His way is tried. The way of the Lord is tried. It's been proven. It's like a testing. You get, if you're a miner, you go out and you find the ore and you take it and you smelt it. You try it with fire. You purify it. God's way is that way. You look, and one of the amazing things about the Scriptures is you read it, and God has given us the great treasure of looking and seeing at people like David. You follow his way, it's perfect. It works. And whenever you do it, you're with this God who is the strength, the rock, the fortress, the deliverer, our God, the buckler, the horn of my salvation, the high tower, worthy to be praised. He is my stay. His way is perfect. Well, God is there like that. He goes on and he says, he liveth. Now you think about in verse 46, whenever he says that, the Lord liveth, and blessed be the rock. Let the God of my salvation be exalted. The Lord liveth. Now, in a world that was then filled with so much idolatry, how do you think that stood out? You know, Isaiah mocked the people who would take a piece of wood and fashion a god out of it, worship it, and then warm themselves with the fire of that they'd just cut off of it. How many people today, what do we serve? Well, you serve God or mammon. What the Lord said in Matthew 6. God liveth. Mammon, things of this earth, they perish. I mean, they're things. We need to understand that we don't serve some made-up God. We don't serve an idol. We don't serve things. God liveth. And what an amazing God he is. But then he also gives me a picture of his or my blessings from him. Now you go through there and it really, you think about, well, just so many things he's done, but there's not a whole lot there that aren't really encompassed under the same umbrella, you might say. The first thing I notice is he heard my voice. Now, one of the blessings, we know that and we'll talk about this in a minute, that we have as our response to God is we cast our cares upon him, for he careth for us. We know that God heareth our prayers. Well, God hears, so what? He heard my voice and he delivered me. In chapter 18 there, in Psalm 18 and verse 6, he says, in my distress I called upon the Lord. He cried unto my God. He heard my voice out of his temple. My cry came before him, even unto his ears. Then the earth shook, trembled. The foundations of the hills moved, were shaken. They went up in smoke in verse 8. He bowed the heavens also in verse 9. He rode upon a cherub and did fly in verse 10. He made the darkness its secret place. His pavilion around him were dark waters and thick clouds of the skies in verse 11. The brightness that was before him as a thick cloud passed, hailstones and coals of fire. You go on down, you read about it. There are figurative languages used, the imagery from creation. You find that as you read it, think about the creation account and the things that occurred there. Think about as he controlled nations. Think about as they crossed over the Red Sea. You find the channels of the waters there. Some think that's an allusion to the channel opening up. You look and you find that he is just showing he delivered me. And in setting it forth, he just uses that imagery that gives us such an amazing picture of strength. Remember, he is God. He controls nature. He controls the world. He is in control. He's on my side. So he delivered me. One writer said, do you feel like you're drowning in a sea of sorrows? Do you feel like your enemies are too strong for you to overcome? Do you feel like you're submerged in a world of problems? What David felt like. God can help. I mean, that's one of the strengths that is set forth about God in this that is a blessing for me. But then the second thing I see is justice. God is God. Sometimes we see people in this earth. Have you ever seen somebody who has just amazing strength? We have one man who comes and visits here, and I know some people are maybe intimidated by him. And he's a big guy. He stands probably about that tall and about this wide. Steve Hetherington, if you know him. I mean, a big guy. Well, he's actually a teddy bear. If you see him with his little baby girl, she's got him wrapped around her finger. But have you ever seen anybody like that? You're kind of afraid because you don't know. What if they got mad? What if they didn't do the right thing around me? I mean, somebody that big, what are they going to do to you? Well, you have a confidence. I look at Steve. He's a good man. I don't worry about him doing wrong. Don't worry about him being evil. He's just right. God, you look at what he's done, what he's able to accomplish. But notice in verse 20 through 27, he says, now the Lord rewarded me according to my righteousness. According to the cleanness of my hands, he recompensed me. I've kept the ways of the Lord and have not wickedly departed from my God. All his judgments were before me. I did not put away his statutes from me. Why should I? After all, they're perfect. They've been tried. I was upright before him. I've kept myself from mine iniquity. Therefore hath the Lord recompensed me according to my righteousness, according to the cleanness of my hands in his eyesight. With the merciful thou wilt show thyself merciful. With an upright man thou wilt show thyself upright. With the pure thou wilt show thyself pure. With the froward thou wilt show thyself froward. For thou wilt save the afflicted people, but will bring down high looks. Sounds familiar. James talks about God resists the proud and gives grace unto the humble. But you look at that, and whenever we stand before God, you realize that it is such that we have this ability to respond to Him. And He says, I'm going to respond to you in a just and right way. I don't have to worry about God not doing the right thing towards me or towards anyone else. Now this flies in the face. You know, so many people in the world today, they look at God and the relationship with Him and say, well, there's no responsibility on my part. He's a God of grace. He's going to give it to me. He's a God of mercy. He's going to give it to me, and it doesn't matter what I do. Well, that brings up some problems in my mind. What about those people that do evil? What about those people that are wrong? You ever get upset at the justice system? Here's somebody who's committed some travesty, maybe against a child, another woman or person, whatever it may be, and they get away with it. You think, where's the justice? In our world today, we don't have justice in our society all the time. But in our dealings with God, one of the blessings I have, I look at Him and I stand in amazement of who He is. And then I look and I realize He hears me and He's going to respond to me. And in my mind I say, well, I hope He responds the right way. And then I realize He always responds the right way. He is going to do what is right, what is proper. If I'm righteous, He's going to do the right thing. If I'm evil, He's going to do the right thing. I don't want the right thing in being evil. I want to be good. I don't want a recompense of evil against me. But God is just, so I choose. The truth is that God is just and He will do that which is right. In Genesis, the 18th chapter, Abraham was seeking to intercede on behalf of Sodom. He was going to go. Sodom was going to be destroyed. He said, well, if peradventure there be, and he went through a number of people. And the fact is, he knew, as he stated in verse 25, shall not the judge of all the earth do right? He knew that was that way. It's heartbreaking to look at a world filled with sin, the sinners that commit it, and realize the justice of God cannot allow Him to simply play like that never happened. He gives a way of escape that we can not only refrain from sin, but if we fail in that, He gives a way of escape that the sin can be dealt with in another manner. But if I choose not to accept that, God is going to be just and He's going to recompense. That's what happened to Sodom. But the flip side of that is, I know that if I do right, God's going to treat me right. You know, it's amazing how we look, and we don't have to fear standing before God, as we know all of us will. Because He is a God who hears. He will give me the ability to be delivered. And I know when I stand before Him, He's just and He's right. And then also see a picture of my response towards God. You know, we talked about lessons for living. Well, here, this gets down to it, and I get to examine myself as the psalmist did and say, okay, what have I done? How have I reacted to God? And whenever I do that, I look in verse 1. I will love Thee, O Lord, my strength. Now you look, 1 John 4:19, you see what David says. Why would God do that? Why would God do all of these things? Why would God even have me on this earth? Why would He have the earth? Because He loves me. 1 John 4:19, we love Him because He first loved us. And so I respond. This is a response towards God in looking at who He is. I will love Thee. And of course that carries with it attendant responsibilities. He says, I will call upon the Lord. You know, what an amazing thing. In Psalm number 866, it's titled, I will call upon the Lord. Young people sing it a lot. It's a beautiful song, and it's out of this song. I will call upon the Lord, who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from mine enemies. We know the Lord liveth. Blessed be the rock. Blessed be the God of my salvation. I mean, that's a beautiful song, but really, that's a response that I have. If I love him, I'm not going to say, I love you, God, and go my way. But rather, I'm going to call upon him. 2 Timothy, the first chapter, in verse 12, the Apostle Paul said that he was not ashamed of those things. In other words, he lived his life a certain way. And this brought about a certainty in his life that he knew this just God would recompense him in verse 6 through 8 because he had fought a good fight. He'd finished his course. He'd kept the faith. In other words, God's going to reward my righteousness. I don't have a problem in the world with God rewarding. That's an amazing God we have who would do that. I'm not worthy of it, but I know that a just God is going to do that very thing. And the reason, though, in chapter 1 and verse 12, he had this confidence in God that these things that he'd committed unto him, what had he committed? Everything. That was calling upon God, looking to him, realizing he is the giver of all that's good and perfect. So he called upon him. 1 Peter 5 and verse 7, we cast our cares upon him, for we know that he careth for us. Now this is responses that go forth, but actually initially it comes whenever I realize here's the great God, and I see it. I come to this point in my life that I recognize that though I was born pure and free from sin, as a child, I grow to the point that I face the lust of flesh, the lust of the eyes, pride of life, and I give in. And sin rises forth in my life. I've separated myself from God. So what shall I do? That cry is given over and over in the accounts of conversion in the book of Acts. What shall we do? Acts the 2nd chapter, verse 37. The Apostle Paul in Acts 9 asked that question. He lived in all good conscience, sincere man, but he found out in Acts 9 that he'd been fighting against the Lord himself. He said, it's me you're persecuting. He said, what will I have me do? Acts 22, he records his conversion, as he does in other instances. But in Acts 22, he talks about this calling on the Lord. He was told, why tarriest thou? Rise and be baptized, and wash away thy sins, calling on the name of the Lord. And that's an important phrase. That initially begins my life of calling. It isn't the end, it's the beginning. The Apostle Paul, whenever he was not disobedient to that vision, he himself was baptized. He was crucified with Christ. He put himself to death. And he began that life of calling upon the Lord, trusting in God, doing those things his way. In the Philippian letter again, remember in verse 13 where I said he could do all things? You look and you find the Apostle Paul in that letter talks about he counted all things but dung, that he might win Christ. What is that? Well, I'm not going to call upon the world. A lot of people do, don't they? Sometimes we do. I can handle this. I can do this. I'll take care of it. If I'm going to live in this life, I've got to. No. There's nothing worth that. I'm going to call upon the Lord. I do that in becoming a child of God, but I do it in living as a child of God. That's why the Apostle Paul, as he wrote by inspiration in Romans 6, he was just amazed how people could even question whether they can continue in sin. And he pointed to the fact of their being dead to sin. The point in time in life whenever they too called upon the Lord in being baptized. So I will call upon the Lord. I have kept the ways of the Lord. Well, in verse 21 he says that. He sets forth several times that same emphasis. But the fact is, that's part of love, isn't it? He says, if you love me, you keep my commandments. I struggle at times. I look at the scriptures. I say, well, I know what that says. Well, this is hard, and I don't know. And then I realize, if I do love God, I'm going to do what he says. Is it easy? No. But it's love. Actually, in Luke 6:46, again, looking and standing in awe of God, Jesus asked, he said, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not the things that I say? Simple matter. Keep the ways of the Lord. That's my response that I find a lesson for living. I have pursued mine enemies, in verse 37. I don't go As a child of God, I shouldn't go spoiling for a fight, but I shouldn't back away from a fight. You know, whenever good people do nothing, what's going to happen? Well, the truth is, if you're really good, if I'm really good, I'm not going to be able to do nothing. I've got to take a stand. So David, he says, you know, I pursued my enemies. I saw the danger there, and I dealt with it. Jude 3, there were people who had crept in unawares, who turned the grace of God into lasciviousness. You know what God said through Jude? Earnestly contend for the faith, which was once delivered unto the saints. In other words, you got to fight for this. You don't just simply say, well, God's word is there, and maybe they'll find it, maybe they'll know it. We take a stand. We're that light, that beacon that shines for the things that are true and faithful and good, that way that is tried. Philippians 1 and verse 27, the Apostle Paul, he said, I want to hear about you, that you're striving together for the faith of the gospel. In 2 Timothy, the 4th chapter, again, Paul, after he had told Timothy, he told Timothy to be a good soldier of Christ. He told him to preach the word no matter what. Be instant in season, out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort. He told him that he needed to be an example of the believers. And then he turned back to himself. And he said, I'm ready to be offered. You know, I'm ready to die. Why? Because I was a fighter. I fought a good fight. I finished my course. I kept the faith. Henceforth, there's laid up for me a crown of righteousness. Like David, he pursued the enemies. We sing that song, Soldiers of Christ Arise. More than a song, Christian living, as the psalmist sets forth. And then he says, therefore, I will give thanks unto thee, O Lord. You know, we think about that. And think, well, I'm thankful. I don't mind showing thanks to God. He says, among the heathen, I will sing praises unto his name. Now there, I think he looks through it. He realizes the expanse. Maybe David didn't realize, but inspiration did. The expanse that God's blessings are for all mankind. But also look at that, and I realize, I think about what I'm willing to do here in this building. Am I willing to say the same things, do the same things, take the same stand? Will I show forth a life of thankfulness towards God amongst the heathen? Or do I kind of hide that? We tell our children, you know, in vacation Bible school and Bible classes, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Hide it under a bushel? No! What do? Amongst family members? Amongst fellow workers? Fellow school students? Do I give thanks unto the Lord? Am I living that life that shows forth who he is and who I am because of him? Or do I hide it because, well, I don't push religion. The psalmist didn't see that. I kept the way of the Lord. I pursued my enemies. My enemies, the evil in this world, they know I'm here. And then he said, I'll give thanks unto thee, O Lord, amongst the heathen. So you look at that and you think about it. But the important thing is, as you do this, lessons for living, we look at that and we emphasize, the psalmist emphasized the idea of my. And I went through, and I hope you along with me, we personalized that. So we began with my God. And then from that, my God has blessed me. What's my response to God for all the blessings he has made available? Well, it all comes down to me. And I have to ask the question of why is he my God? Seeing who he is, why me? He brought forth also in a large place. He delivered me, for he delighted in me. Now we went on, we read that a moment ago, about how God is just. But you look at that and you realize he talked about my God, but now he turns over and he looks at himself. And he says, here's why you are my God. He delighted in me because I determined to be the type of person that this amazing God makes possible. So I look and I realize that it's up to me. And I can ask a question. You know, if he delights in me. One writer said the whole triumphal procession started with, I will love you, O Lord, my strength. If this is true in us, God will move heaven and earth for ours and my sake. I want to add something to that. If this is true, as he says, I will love you, O Lord. If that's true, it's up to me to figuratively move heaven and earth. In other words, there's nothing I won't do for him. I will keep his ways. I will refuse to forsake him. And that gives me a reason for living, a focus of living, lessons for living. But it's all my choice. So I look at that and I ask, does God delight in me? Which really comes down to, is God my God? You know, we talked about how that began by initially calling upon the Lord and becoming a child of God, but then living a life of calling upon him. So is God my God? I can pretend. I can be a part-time Christian, and I use that word figuratively because we can't be Christians part-time. If God is my God, I stand in awe of him, I'm blessed by him, and I fulfill my responsibilities to him. And I know that he's with me. And so I live that life. I face the struggles. I face the hard decisions, but I do what's right. So tonight, or this morning, is God my God?